Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where frontline sales leaders teach you how to build and scale an outbound sales team. Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart, and today I'm joined by, can I call you a unicorn sales rep? Somebody who's sold over 100 million in revenue? Is that the term?
That's, I guess, what the cool kids are saying these days. So sure, you
Cool.
can say whatever you'd like. Thank you.
So unicorn sales rep, having closed an absolute shit ton of revenue. Also founder and CEO over at Avenue Talent Partners. And today's going to be an interesting conversation because we're talking about really unpacking the why behind who you should hire next. And the way this episode took shape is we were initially going to talk about something else. And then I had just gotten not off the phone, but I was in a meeting with a friend of mine a couple of days before we started mapping out like what we were going to talk about. And he'd actually called me, the week before that and saying, hey, we're interviewing somebody that used to work with you. Should I hire her? And I was like, and in my head, I was like, okay, well, there's the snap decision that I would just want to say. But then I was like, well, hang on a sec. Let's unpack this for a minute because it totally depends on the context of why are you hiring them? And he was a founder building his first sales team. And so we had to dive in and say unpack okay, where are you at in terms of who you want to hire from a sales perspective? Who do you have already? And what are your capabilities? Because we were looking at okay, well, what jobs need to be done, right? And there's the sort of sales, whoever's going to hire the team. And then there's whoever's going to manage them. And then whoever's going to build the playbook. And then who's going to set the strategy. And currently you need to, I was telling him, you need somebody to own each of these jobs. And the level that you're going after to hire somebody for is you need to sort of determine where you're comfortable drawing the line in the sand. Do you want them to go all the way to the top and run strategy down? Are you just looking for somebody to hire and manage some people? And so he was like, can't you just give me a yes or a no?
If it only were that easy, right?
Right. I thought you said it was that easy. I just had it wrong.
Well, I mean, that brings up such a good point because I think back channeling, we're living out loud, as I like to say, in this digital age, and the walls that we all could once hide behind, they're crumbling at a rapid pace. And with so many outlets to engage and to find people, I can find somebody in 2 seconds, and it's really easy to do that with a simple Google search or Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever the case may be. Most people have a digital footprint, so to speak. And so it's interesting that you're talking about the story. We talked about it before. I put out a LinkedIn posting today that talked about a horrific story that I had heard about. It was not my client. And I used it as an example about what you don't do on the candidate side as well as on the client side. Each person had a responsibility and why it went so far south. And somebody had commented and they were like, yeah, that's, I've had this horrible experience. And that's why I make sure to do my homework to understand those that came before me and to make my assessments from that. And I said, I hear what you're saying. And there's a lot of information that comes from the people that are currently there, the people that were once there, and the people that will come in the future. However, there's a fine line when it comes to everyone has their own unique experience. And where I am in my career, this person that you might have worked with, Collin, what if that was 6 years ago and she's done a lot of work on herself and she's been promoted and she has a career coach now and she's gone through a lot of personal development. The things that you might say that you didn't like, or she might need to work on. I always do that when I'm talking too fast. So a good catch to slow it down. But maybe those are the things that she's worked on and she is totally dominated in now because she cared about it. For you to you were luckily being responsible, but so many people are irresponsible or they're spiteful. I mean, there's this icky part of human nature. You could have said things that could have removed an opportunity for two parties to come together to do really great work. And so I always say there is a fine line. Back channeling is great. It happens with employers too. It's not just them looking at candidates. Candidates are looking at them. And what I try to encourage people to think about is look at the sum of the parts, not just one story. And if one person that you just so happen to see on LinkedIn says that they didn't like something, but 10 others do, you have to understand, are there themes that you need to drill into further? Or is that really the story? And so many people are just looking for like these quick answers to make a decision for them, that I really applaud you for taking the time to say, well, wait a second, we might not be talking about an apple to apple comparison here. There might be other factors to think about. And here's what I think you should think about. Kudos to you. I wish more people did that. And while yes, back channeling can be really powerful, it's all about the context and understanding how those bits and pieces come together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, thanks for that. From my perspective, I genuinely didn't know how to give them like what the right answer was. Cause for this candidate, like we worked together for 3 months and then we had decided not to continue with her employment, but she did a great job at certain things. And so I'm like, well, if he's looking for those certain things, she's the best person you can find in town for those things. We just like, when I look at, her resume, she got 3 months with us, and like, was it like, is it on her because that she only worked here 3 months, or, did like, he might not understand the context that, hey, we actually hired for one level and we wanted to hire for one level, and it turned out we needed actually a totally different thing. We hired somebody for sales and we actually needed somebody to run all of revenue. Right. And she was great at sales, but didn't have that whole revenue perspective. Is that her fault or is that my fault? Right. Like that's my fault as the person that was making that hire. And so when I look at trying to answer my buddy Ilya, it's like, well, I'm not sure if I can, because there are certain things where this person's going to be great in certain areas that we found that, we had hired for the wrong things. So anyway, to me, it just seemed like the logical, like it could have been a glowing yes, or it could have been, not sure, depending on what he was looking for.
Well, and let's reverse engineer it. Let's say it's a glowing yes. Even if that's the case, peeling back, so the common theme of our chat today is the word why. Peeling back those layers to understand why it's a resounding yes, and looking for those common themes of just because it was a yes for you then 3 months ago, or for 3 months or however long ago, you know what I'm saying? But just because it was a yes then, do I need the same thing? Because in that case that you're talking about, right? So you needed something that was a bit more robust. You needed a true revenue leader. It would be like you, Collin, coming down my street and saying, wow, Amy, you know what? You've sold a lot. You've also been in leadership. I want you to run revenue. And we start having a conversation. I'll tell you right now, I am not a marketing expert, right? There are so many different pieces that come to revenue. And that might be a really good place to gut check that, to double click on, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? And both of you, because it's not just your responsibility hiring her, it was also her responsibility accepting the role. And I would put responsibility on both of you to have that conversation, cards face up, realistic, like, here are the things that you haven't done before. Mm-hmm. How do we bridge that gap? And you uncover things. And I think so many people just kind of take a back seat to this thing that's called the hiring process, that is so important, because if you don't get it right, as you know, after 3 months, was that a good thing to go through? Like, did that serve your business really, really well?
Oh yeah. It was super fun. It didn't waste any money or time. And we had recruited somebody out of a different organization. And the reason that the hire wasn't successful wasn't because she wasn't a great person. She's an awesome person with tons of skills. We just didn't do this work ahead of time to say, okay, well, what is the why? Why do we really want something? Why do we really want somebody for this role? And what are the exact parameters of this role? We didn't do our diligence there in terms of doing the work ahead of time. We came across somebody great, and when we were hiring for this role, and we said, hey, like, when you find somebody great, let's just make that hire. And I think it's easy. It's advice that I've heard over and over and over again, and it's so fucking wrong. It's incredible. Hiring the right, like, somebody amazing for the wrong role, and like, it works great if you're a high growth company that has lots of cash in the bank and unlimited future positions, because everything's going to grow. But if you're not adding, 10, 20 hires, or like a month, right, you're going to hire somebody awesome into the wrong role, and then they're stuck, and then they're not happy. So yeah, that was our journey into not doing the homework. So I'm curious, to help me avoid this again, and hopefully we've got some of this on the go, or in the works, but how do I avoid making that same mistake again?
So I think it's little bits and pieces of what we've talked about, but let's get specific with that. So I think first and foremost, before you ever decide to hire, and by the way, I would argue a little bit respectfully with your last point of, unless you're a bigger company that's totally scaling with deep pockets, you can afford to do that. You may not even realize that you have that person, or you might be pushing them down and they're going to leave you anyway, or they can't get there fast enough, or you don't even know how to map that out because you're not connecting with your employees. I read this thing recently where Zappos reported they spent over $100 million, like 100 million. That's the status that many companies or startups want to get to be the unicorn. That's a lot of cash on mishiring. Like, that's like big, right? So I don't care if it's a startup that's early stage or if it's the Facebooks of the world, it hurts you. Mm-hmm. Bottom line. I'd like to think I'm helping Zappos recover one shoe shopping trip at a time, but that's a different story for a different day. How do you get it right? So I think it goes back to the whole concept of why. Before you ever start anything, it's like me starting my own business. If I didn't know why I was doing it, especially in the cluttered space that I'm in, how do you stand out? And I think when you really fundamentally, like, forget about the jargon, forget about the stuff that everybody talks about, like our corporate culture, our mission, our values, like that's all important. But if it can't cut through the fluff and the jargon to cut to the quick of why any of us is doing what we're doing, that is absolutely foundational where it starts. Because if I know that, and I can speak to that, and I pay attention to the other person that I'm speaking to, I need to see that there is connective tissue there. If somebody's just like dead-eyed, like, yeah, so this just happened with somebody that I interviewed. I said, so help me understand. And this was at the end of the conversation. I said, we've covered a lot, and I'm the last step in my process, and you've got a lot of information about this company. Before we talk about next steps, help me understand, like, what about this is interesting to you? What you have 4 other opportunities that you've told me about. Let's talk about that. And they couldn't get specific with me. They were like, well, like, it sounds interesting. So A, I know that they didn't read anything or do any homework, but B, they're like, yeah, I'm just casting a wide net, and like, I can sell ice to an Eskimo. And I hate that when people tell me that. And I said, here's the thing. If you can't get specific with me about what's important to you, and I know you're not used to this with an external recruiter, I think we need to put this conversation on ice because I'm not comfortable, right? And this was a common theme through a lot of things, but I think the script, Collin, is reversed. Like, let's reverse that for the hiring piece. Why am I hiring? If I don't know why I'm hiring, and it's just because I got a round of funding and it's what you do because that's how you SaaS, like, cut it out. Stop it right there. So I think it's about why. Is it the right time? Just because I'm at a certain stage, or just because I've got a certain amount of money in the bank, why? And especially when it comes to sales hiring, do you have enough territory to support the reps or the people that you're going to be hiring? How are you going to support them? What will they actually be doing? What does that look like? And even if you're an early stage startup where you're still trying to figure it out, that's okay. Speak to that. Don't lie. And make sure that you've got people that are up for that get charged by that want to do that have done that before. The number one thing that people don't do is they don't realize their place in the ecosystem. Meaning, I want to act like I'm a C-round company when I'm at seed stage and hire a person that's leading a sales team at that stage for my company, and those two things don't correlate. So I think it's about, first of all, why, then what, and then it goes into how. And having a process that's well documented, having the ability to understand who's going to be involved, why they're involved. I talk about the power of a scorecard. These are all going to be things that you and I break down throughout the course of this conversation. But I think first and foremost, if you don't know why and you don't know what, forget about the how and the process and everything else. You are going to get it wrong.
100%. And I like how and I just, maybe if we can double click on that stage of the company piece of pretending to be a C when you're actually a seed. Because this is, I think I've been tempted to make this mistake, and we actually I didn't actually pull the trigger, but we interviewed a lot of later stage sales leaders when we were trying to take our first crack at hiring a sales leader to take everything off of my plate. And I remember some of those conversations, and we followed the who process, and I passed off, I did a bunch of the screens, and I passed off these great candidates, and they just got annihilated in the who process. And it turns out that it was a signal that, hey, we are misaligned. Myself and the team, we had done a scorecard, but we weren't super clear on things. Because I was thinking for who is the be all, like who's going to be the best sales leader possible, when what we really needed was who's the best sales leader possible for where we are at today. And fortunately, the team was a really good check on me, because I was just interviewing for who's the best. And when we got very specific, we ended up changing the hiring profile. We changed the job ad. So I'm curious your thoughts on how does the stage of the company really affect who you're going after in terms of sales leader, or just in terms of in general?
It makes or breaks all of it. So I would say, kudos to your team for calling you and saying, hey, we have a little bit of a situation here. We are not aligned. So, in that you actually listened and you came together and you figured it out together. Most don't do that. Or in my world, there is this like kind of fake it till you make it, which is the worst advice ever. Well, I think I know what I want and I'm going to sound really confident. So I'm like software. How you program me is directly correlated to the outcome of what it is that we're doing. Mm-hmm. And when there is such a huge course correction of like if you were my client and all of a sudden I've got 4 candidates in front of you and we realize this, I might not want to work with you anymore. Like we will really have to understand. I vet my clients as much as I'd bet anybody I'd bring their way. And when these things happen, I talk about it through my discovery process of like, this is what the best partnerships look like and great sales hiring. And this is what abusive relationships look like, or not it's not even abusive, but it's like, here's what doesn't work. And what doesn't work is when you course correct to that degree, because I would venture to guess that, and I'm not scolding you, by the way, this is just a really good example that you could be anybody, Collin. It's not just you. You're like, whoa, come in and
go get a tissue.
You need a hug. Come here. It's okay. Yeah. But like all fun aside, I think when you course correct, you've got a candidate experience problem on your hands now, because they're going to be like, you don't know what the hell you want. Like, what's the matter with you? You wasted my time. Mm-hmm. It starts from the top down. What's that all about? And remember, it's a two-way street. And just because that candidate, so you're thinking about the perfect person, just because that candidate wasn't good now, what if they're good 3 years from now and you put the ickiest taste in their mouth? Not only are they not going to want to talk to you, they're going to tell other people. So I don't think people realize like the table stakes and what that actually looks like and how it all goes together. So when you course correct, know that you start, I don't care if it's with a third-party recruiter or internal recruiting or what you're doing, you have to start all over again. And all of that time and equity that you invested into that goes flying out the side door, let alone whatever experience your internal team of rolling their eyes and being like, really? And anybody externally is thinking. So this is why it's so foundational. And it doesn't mean that you can't change or you can't iterate. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying if there's such a complete departure of what you realize, going back to your question about stages of company, an early stage company, like if you're at 500,000, I'm just throwing out a number, to like your first 2 million, the leader that is there for that is completely different than at 50 million. And I get this conversation, or I get this question all the time and have this conversation where people are like, yeah, so I want to hire. So they're like at like the 1 to 5 million mark. They're like, yeah, so I need a CRO that's going to get us to $80 million. And I'm like, that's going to be a conversation you and I have for about 5 years down the road, right? Like this is, and what happens is when people get caught up in the shiny objects, or you have a board and they're like, here's this big brand logo person, you got to hire them. They've got a playbook. They have a playbook for how to exist at Salesforce. No knock on Salesforce or IBM or Oracle or whomever it might be. But that motion, that foundation, that process, that enablement, that operationally speaking of how it's set up is totally different than when you're at $500,000 and nobody knows who the hell you are. And the work is different and the leadership is different. And so, you know, there's that mentality of like, you fix it, you nail it, you scale it. Well, at that round, like you may not even have anything to fix yet. Like you've just got to put the different bits and pieces in place. And so, yes, there are so many impressive leaders out there. It's like hiring a salesperson. Well, you went to President's Club, you're going to be our rock star person. No, there's a difference between outbound, inbound, enterprise, SMB, outside, inside, like, you know, the list goes on.
The company and the product that you were selling.
Correct. And by the way, all of this maps back to what is your marketplace telling you? Because your customers hold the keys always. It doesn't matter what I say, doesn't matter what you say. It matters what they're telling you and how they're responding. And so when it comes to a sales leader, do they understand that? And especially for earlier stage, if you're hiring somebody that this is their fifth rodeo, which by the way, those people are unicorns because by this time they're fatigued, they've made money through exits, they don't want to do this anymore. So, you know, when I talk to people or their founders and they're like, yeah, we want somebody that's done this like 10 times. I'm like, yeah. So that'll either be the person that's terrible because they can't, they just keep doing it the wrong way. Or those people that have done it, that have had multiple exits, they're consulting or they're doing something else. So it goes back to hire for your stage and the work that truly needs to be done, and not to be afraid because you're caught up in your ego to say, I don't know yet. I've attempted to do founder-led selling. We've got our first 5 customers. That isn't product market fit. I need you to come here and help me figure this out. We don't have good messaging. This is what we've done. And so many people get scared to talk about that because it's like leaders are like, well, what if I give my playbook? We're going to use that. And it's like, well, they would need to know how, and they're going to hire somebody else, if not you, and they're going to bring their own playbook. So don't worry about that. And then conversely on the other side, well, I don't want to tell people because, you know, that's confidential. And the easiest way to solve for that is sign a mutual NDA and then peel back the layers and get into a healthy, collaborative, two-way conversation. So I covered a lot there. I'm going to stop because clearly you struck a chord. I'm like, and then this, and then that. But I mean, it's all important things to think about.
Yeah. And I think this is the piece that didn't really take shape in my mind until after. And I was really putting some thought into, okay, because you're totally right. It's if you start in one direction and then you pivot midway through, it's almost the equivalent. I would say it's the almost exact equivalent of being a salesperson and having your boss say, go build this new territory. Then you start to get a couple ops and they're like, hey, you know what? We actually don't want to go after that industry. We need you to go after this whole new set of accounts. And so now you're starting fresh. And just imagine if you're in sales and you're going through this hiring motion, imagine what that would do to your whole team. Whether it's the people that are, you know, booking those first meetings, the people that are taking the deals, or people that are expecting the pipeline to be coming through, it's a major shift. And I love the way you sort of break it down to here are the things that need to be done in the early stage, here are the things that need to be done in the late stage, because absolutely shouldn't be hiring a CRO or somebody with CRO experience over at Zendesk for your company that's got, you know, 500K in annual recurring revenue. So I love that piece. So when it comes to like, maybe we can dive into like the types of leaders, right? Because like you said, it starts with product market fit. Some founders are going to be able to get them there. I would argue that finding product market fit and getting those first 10 case studies isn't actually part of the sales process at all. It's part of the product process. It's not, you know, people talk about customer validation. Well, it's not customer validation until they've given you some fucking money. And so.
Yes, the money talks in that case. Well, and keep in mind, I read this thing from the Startup Genome Report that said founders take 2 to 3x longer than what anybody ever anticipates, them included, to validate product market fit. And the reason why, one of the main reasons why 70% of startups fail, 2 things: you tried to scale too fast. So this hiring thing gets done way too fast. And this was from CB Insights, and I was like, yes, the number one reason, I forgot what the percentage was because it was like the top 20 reasons why startups fail. The number one was product market fit. So hello. So when I think about that, right, and I translate that to what we're talking about and the different kinds of people. I 100%, if I could make 100% more when people are like, I 1,000% agree. It's like, no, it's just 100%. So I 100% agree with you when it comes to breaking down at the earlier stage, those first 10 to 20 customers. I mean, it depends on the meatiness, I suppose, of them. Mm-hmm. In my mind, that is validation of the product market evolution and journey. And that's like foundation, that's building the house. So like that needs to happen. And in my opinion, that needs to happen from the founders or the product folk. Like that does not happen with any external salesperson that you're trying to hire. And I know that so many people want to hack or they want a shortcut. I like that for a few different reasons. One, even if you're a technical founder, I want you to understand why sales isn't a necessary evil, why this is germane to your organization, what your customers are really telling you versus what you think because you're brilliant, you went to Stanford, you have all the answers and your ego's super caught up because everyone's stroking you, saying that you've got the next best thing since sliced bread. Well, maybe you do, but if that doesn't sell, that doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. So, keep in mind, I like that a founder gets into the nitty gritty of that they understand really what their buyer journey looks like. If they're trying to do enterprise, that is 18 plus months to build anything out from scratch. And I'm being conservative with that. Do they get that? Do they understand that? What I don't like, that doesn't work. So here's the first step that people try to do is, let me hire a player coach. No, please don't do that. 9 times out of 10, it never works, because what they'll do is they'll try to save a few bucks and saying, I'm going to hire a rep that's poised for the next step. There are certainly many people out there that are poised for the next step. So bring on the hate mail. People are going to be like, no, I'm ready. That's great. But if you haven't done it before and you think you can, perception versus reality, especially in the dynamics of an earlier stage startup where there isn't the resource and support or understanding, especially if it's a first-time founder, they don't know how to coach you. And your ego starts getting, and I'm not just talking about ego being a bad thing, I'm talking about we all have it. And the stories that we tell ourselves of, I know I can do this, versus you get in there and you're like, I have no idea how to do this. And you go out to LinkedIn or you go to wherever it is and you try to get all this advice, and there's a million different pieces of advice for the same thing. You're chasing your tail. It does not work. And then you start hiring people and you don't know how to slice and dice territories. You're selling alongside your salespeople. It's creating an icky, like it just doesn't work. So don't do the player coach. That's usually step one though. Please don't do that. Do it yourself as a founder or as a founding team.
100% agree. And I'll add, because I got to throw in a Canadian reference there. The only time the player coach role has ever worked was in the movie Slapshot. And that was in a movie.
Yes. Canadians for the win.
Yeah. Because I think about so you're totally right. If you're a founder and you're trying to hire that first sales manager, unless you've been a sales manager yourself and you can coach this new sales manager that's taking the step up in their career, you're fucked, right? Unless you can do that yourself and you hire somebody that's taking that step, you aren't going to be able to coach them. So you need somebody that can come in and tell you how it's done. You need somebody more senior than you in that area, which is why you're hiring a manager. So I think step one, 100%. Step two is if they are a quotes player coach, I love the idea of starting with, so I hate the player coach idea. I love the idea of starting with, they sell, they book meetings, whatever, for the first month, 6 weeks, so they can show they got chops. They can prove out templates and prove out closing process. To me, that's just part of smart onboarding and figuring shit out. But you can do 1 or 2 jobs. You can either close or you can build, but you can't do both at the same time. It's not possible. It's 2 very different mindsets. And like you said, it very, very rarely works.
Well, and go back to then, how do you compensate them? And I'm a big fan of, anytime you think about compensation plans, you want to incentivize the behavior that you want to see. So if they are playing and they are coaching, so to speak, or they are playing and they are building, or all of the above, those are 3 very different things that sometimes compete against each other. Mm-hmm. And how I've never seen a good compensation plan that incentivizes behavior that you want to see. So I wouldn't start there. So then where do you start is the question. And the question can be, so especially if it's earlier stage, people care about career progression. And this comes from candidates. Like, I don't want to just take a lateral, especially in this world where here in the US, Our unemployment rates are the lowest they've been in 50 years, and there aren't really a whole lot of signs that it's going to slow down. And then you layer that on top of, according to LinkedIn, sales is the number one thing that tech companies are hiring for. And you think about then the churn, and this is big companies or small companies. Like I read something, Oracle, their sales team stays on average for like 1.8 years. Like this isn't just a startup thing. So turnover is a big deal. And sales leadership turnover is 19 months and shrinking. So like, it's like a crisis every which way you look at it. It's like supply and demand. They're both screwed. So what do you do? So I think titles are a little vague here, and you're going to see me be a little vague. That first hire could be a sales manager. It could be a sales director. It could be a senior director of sales, but that's it. Like in my mind, it stops there, because what will happen is, yes, this person could be a $1 to $5 million dollar range leader. They know what to do there. They crave that. They can get you that initial foundational process stuff, but they've never been beyond that. And the magic that starts happening when you are at the $50 million mark, let's say, that's like, if you're at 5 million to 50 million, that's like a whole other ball of wax. And that's probably 2 additional leaders in between now and then. And so what I tell founders is, the last thing you want to do is hire somebody that's remarkable. They bleed your blood. They've created that foundation. You wrote them a check, though, that you can't cash. You promised them the sun, moon, and stars and said, we grow, you grow. We get rich, you get rich. Everyone's going to win here. Yeah, woo! And then all of a sudden you've got 3 years down the road and this person has hit a wall. They can't see beyond what needs to happen next. And even though they've got mentors and even though they're trying, it just doesn't click in, and they really need that leader above them. But you've promised them that they're going to be that leader. They get pissed. You lose them when you don't have to. So again, it goes back to that foundational piece of where it starts of open two-way communication through the hiring process, through the onboarding process, and through the employee life cycle of, hey, let's go back to what we talked about. These are the things that I'm seeing. We love it. But remember how we talked about, like, at some stage it might get bigger than both of us? I think we're there. What do you think? What do you think we need to do? Is it time to hire that next level? They don't feel as icky because you didn't make them a promise that now you're going back on. So I think it's, that next level then. So you go from the director word, right? Then you think about a VP, SVP, and then you start thinking about the CRO. And in some cases, there are companies that are going to a total revenue model. What you were talking about, where you wanted somebody to own it all, that's a completely different person, right? So then you've got these like growth roles that combine a lot of different things in one. So that's, in my mind, the way that I see it, without as much choppiness as I see when it's like, oh my gosh, we've got this person, they come from our industry, they've got relationships, they can open up doors, they can do these things, and we're going to make them a CRO because that's what they need to get them. If that's the number one priority of the person that's coming your way is just about the CRO title, you might want to second guess or think, or whatever we want to say, or reconsider making that move to bring that person on.
I 100% agree. And just as I was saying that, dropped my wedding ring.
I thought you dropped a mic. I was like, look at you dropping your own mic. I like it.
So if I could just summarize what you're saying there, stage 0, this is for founders only. Product market fit. You cannot, basically do not collect $200 until you've collected those first 5 case studies, 10 to 20 customers, 5 case studies. Stage 1 is you're hiring. So this is moving from the founder selling to you want to build a team. You're saying that first hire is a director, manager of sales, and that individual is responsible for building the playbook, hiring the first 2 reps.
Correct.
And then you bring them in at manager director level so that you leave room to bring in a VP, SVP later when you get past that couple $1 million range and you really need to start adding layers into the organization. And then stage 3 is 50 million plus. That's the CRO title.
Correct. Well, and it might be different dollar amounts, but yes. And in my entire career of 20 plus years of being around the block, I've only seen one instance where the sales director that was hired became the CRO. He was a unicorn, right? And it was inside, outside, enterprise, SMB, mid-market, like the whole gamut, and he did it well. I don't see many people doing that. So one caveat to that, Collin, that I didn't mention that I think is important to think about is after that founder-led piece, my mind automatically skews to enterprise sales. Those are my roots. That's where I've always been. But that's not always the case. And so keep in mind, a director of inside sales or a director of sales development, those two people might look different, let alone a director of enterprise sales. So please keep in mind what segment or segments are you going after. So we just took on a search and did our kickoff and discovery last week. And he was like, we have a few things going on. I don't even know what to think about. We have remote, we have international, we have inside, and we have outside. So who do I hire for that? Right? And I said, forget about the title for a second because we're going to be in a little bit of a gray area. But what we need to think about is somebody that has done this work at your stage. And he's like, I'm really glad you said that because I've been getting a bunch of advice about like, you need an SVP that's had all of it. I'm like, you have 2 million in revenue. No, like that's not going to go so well for you. And so he was like, no, thank you. So, these are things that I don't think people think about. And they're like, oh, I can just make, a BDR director, my director of enterprise sales. And it's like, no, you can't. And those things don't look the same because the work is different. The buyer journey is different. And if you're setting the stage for process, for coaching your reps, for how you talk about it with your buyers and their journey and what needs to happen and what that looks like and expectations. So this role, in my opinion, regardless of what stage it is, if you're not prepared to give them a seat at the table, you might want to rethink whether you want to hire or not yet, because their job is to help figure out what's happening in the world that you don't want to deal with any longer and manage up and across the organization to put the different pieces together. And if you think that you already know all the answers, then why are you hiring? So that's another thing to think about is, if this person's doing this work and they're bringing back information that's really valuable to set your expectations, especially if you're going for another round of funding and you're talking about what's happening in the market and you have no idea, you're going to write, again, checks that you can't cash, and you're going to have a different level of expectation from your funding partners, i.e. VC or PE, depending on which route you go, and that can nip you in the bud later. So there's lots of different layers, but again, it goes back to that intentionality of like, what in the hell is going on with your business and why do you need to hire in the first place?
100%. And you're totally right that the sort of stage 0, 1, 2, 3, this is for, this is your template build for your standard B2B SaaS company with certain revenue. And we have no specifics about that company. If you're, all of your, like, I would ask, how do your channels like play into that organization? Right.
Yeah, totally. Channel partnerships, OEM, that whole deal, that's like a completely different ball of wax. There's a lot of, it's not like, I say this all the time, it's not a one size fits all. So just because you read an article from, and I'm thinking of all the ones that I hear about and I don't want to call anybody out, but just because you read an article somewhere and this person has had multiple exits, or the people that are writing the article have had multiple exits from 1995, doesn't mean that that's what happens today. Just doesn't. And it could have happened 3 years ago, and it doesn't mean that that's what happens today. It's what's happening in your business. So stop following everybody else and start paying attention to your own backyard.
100%. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and the way he described listening to, what worked for other people was like, that's just them sharing their winning lottery numbers, right? It's one
Yes.
It's one experience, but it's not necessarily going to translate into your business. And it's good to have the anecdotes to compare to, but their winning lottery numbers aren't probably aren't going to work at your organization.
It's like when people are like, I am a challenger salesperson, I will only hire challenger salespeople. It's like, well, I went through Miller Hyman 3 times, and Challenger and Sandler and Spin I've read or been a part of. I don't subscribe to any one thing. Here's the deal. It's the application of how. right? So how do I do what I do? Not just the winning lottery numbers, not just the fact that I'm a this or I'm a that trained person. It means, what did I do through that experience and how can I apply it to the next thing? And if you don't understand that and you're just making assumptions, you're assuming a lot of risk that you shouldn't have to assume, that can potentially hurt you, and nobody wants that.
And I think what they're looking at is like, here's the playbook I used at my last company to be successful. These are my winning lottery numbers. I'm going to try and replicate that internally. And I think you said it in our pre-interview, you know, what served you well at one company won't necessarily serve you well in the next.
No, and you know, that's so true. And it bears repeating, Collin. The things that I did now I go back to the world of sales wasn't over segmented when I grew up in the sales world. I had to do everything myself. I was my own AM. I was my own BDR. I was my own enterprise seller. I landed and expanded, like all the things. I've been in sales leadership, and I'm grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that because I have an appreciation and perspective for how all those things work, and doing that work and understanding the buyer journey from like soup to nuts. However, what I did then, and I've sold products and services, and those are very different things. What I did to be successful then versus flash forward now to how my company grows today and the things that I do, I take some of those pages from those chapters of those books that served me really, really well, but I have to adapt them, and the work is different. And if I just, you know, kind of dug my heels in the sand and said, no, this is how I've always done it, and this is the Amy Volas tried and true proven methodology. It's like when people ask me, what are the 3 interview questions I should always ask? I'm like, there are no 3 interview questions you should always ask. I mean, the number one that I always ask, it doesn't matter, is what's important to you. And where it goes from there is the homework that I did before the interview to prepare my thoughts on this person, what I want to learn, where we are in our organization, to learn more about them, to confirm or deny. Having some weird, random question about, if I was on an island and you were on a planet, what's the circumference between the two and how would you get there, and making an assessment off of that, that is nonsense in my opinion. And so the same rules apply here. Is like, yes, there are going to be pages that you take, but what got me to a certain level doesn't mean that that's going to be what it takes to carry me to the next level. And there are books about that that I love.
Sure. I love reading, because the three, when people ask me like, what are the 3 questions? And we have our hiring process documented, pretty nailed down. But when people outside are like, what are the 3 questions? I'm like, name, phone number, email address. Like, you need to know that for everybody.
Oh my gosh. You almost made me do like an embarrassing first moment on a podcast. I was like, oh good, he's talking, so I'll take a sip. I almost shot that out through my mouth. No, that would have been a moment. No, I mean, it's so true. But that's why I say, like, my number one standard question is, what's important to you? Because if what's important to you has nothing, and it doesn't mean that I don't want to know what you're personally interested in, but if we're talking about business and you're like, hey, this is what gets me up in the morning, and this is what I'm most proud of, and this is what I have to have, and this is what I want to stay away from. And they're like, what I have to have is a fully baked out process and an enablement team and a marketing team and inbound leads. I can't solve for that. And isn't that a great place to start to confirm or deny, right? So many people are like, yeah, let's get into behavioral interviewing. Tell me about a time. Like, no, just have a conversation. And yes, tell me about a time, but make it organic to where the conversation is going. Not, these are our 10 questions. Everyone's asking them, and it's always going to be, tell me about a time that you faced adversity and how you overcame that. Guess what? You can Google the top interview sales questions. HubSpot's got them all over the place, and people will become robotic because they will know what to expect. In a natural, organic conversation that you're listening to each other and you're solving for whatever it is that your business is going through and how they did it in their career, and listening to that and keeping note of the things that you need to cover through your scorecard, my, oh my, isn't that a different end result?
100%. And you mentioned a couple of books. I'm a big reader. So what books do you recommend when people are in this phase of figuring out how to hire?
So I'm a huge Simon Sinek fan. I mean, like we're talking about the word why. I'm going to see him in Chicago in 2 weeks and I cannot wait. So it starts with why, find your why. And now he's got a new book that I read called The Infinite Game. That's all about leadership. And all of his books are great. So anything by Simon Sinek is going to be amazing. Crossing the Chasm is a wonderful read for founders when it comes to where you are and early adopters versus, like it's like the whole thing. Lost and Founder is a great book that talks about Rand Fishkin's experience as a founder when he took money, what that looked like, the mistakes that he made when it came to hiring, like all of the things that paint a very real picture of what happens in startups in a really raw way. I think everybody should read that. Mm-hmm. So if I could take you'll see there are books all around me, and I commit every day to reading a chapter from whatever book I can get my hands on. I've got like 6 books that I'm reading right now. And so, yeah, I don't think reading's ever going to work against you, but those are like my faves.
Awesome. Cool.
What about you? What are you reading?
What am I reading right now? I just finished. So if we're talking about hiring, I think the book that had the biggest impact on me and our company was Who. Yeah.
So good.
Top Grading is a encyclopedia or a university textbook. And I looked at it and I'm like, not going to get through this, but Who, everybody on the team has gotten through. I read a lot, but I looked at that and I was like, oh, this seems like I need an advanced degree for. So I'll probably go back to it one day. But what am I reading now? I just finished a documentary on Genghis Khan, which was super interesting. And then I'm reading a book called Peak that's all about performance and athletics. But the most recent one, good one that I've listened to that's sort of business related. Who I've listened to, read a bunch of times, and it's fantastic. But the one that I just finished was actually it was a recommendation from, I'm trying to blank on who it was, but Daring Greatly by Brené Brown was just a great one on sort of mindset. It was a female sales leader that had recommended it to me and said, hey, if you're, it's not specifically like Lean In, but it was sort of a little bit more, she's a vulnerability researcher. And so there was that angle of sort of women in tech, women in sales, women in the workplace to it. But I felt like it applied across the board, but there were some really interesting insights there. So I'd say that was probably the last high impact book that I read. She's coming out with a podcast too. Is she? She is. I read about that last week. So for all of us Brené Brown fans, she's coming to our ears soon. Perfect. All right. So we've kind of talked about the sales hiring architects. We got a little distracted by talking about, some book recommendations. I'd love to sort of dive in on what your hiring process looks like. It sounds like it starts with why, and then what is the next step? So then I think it's about what. So what is it that I need, and mapping that out and knowing that not all salespeople are created equal. And instead of, I hear so many people say this, like, I just looked online and I took somebody else's job description and it looked good enough, so that's what we're using. So yeah, don't use that or do that. So then it's like really being intentional to get the bullet points down. And I'm not even talking about this is your job description that you share with people externally. It means think about it in sort of like a quadrant of like, absolutely this is table stakes. We cannot do this without this. These are the things that we're willing to compromise on. And each time it's like, there's the statement, why? There's the statement, why? There's the statement, why? The things that we'd like to have, and then where this role grows into. Because keep in mind, the biggest misconception that people have is that salespeople are coin operated. Now, I'm here to tell you, yes, I'm not a nonprofit organization and I care about money, but the best sellers and the best sales leaders, realize that if everything else is broken, you'll never get the money, right? So what people care about the most from the data that I've seen and what I hear firsthand every day of talking to people are 3 things. 1, leadership. It starts from the top down. So when you think about the growth ahead in that quadrant, as you're mapping out the description,
being able to talk to them about your involvement to help them get where they're going and what that might look like, even if it is a sales leadership role. And then the other piece is they care about product market fit. So like, what does that look like going forward? And then they also care about, so it's growth, leadership, product market fit. Those are the three things. So, and those, that doesn't mean that that has to be everywhere, all over the place, but just keep in mind when it comes to keeping me for the long haul to defy the turnover odds or the churn odds, those are going to be things that you want to think about in that fourth quadrant of mapping out the description. What happens next? How do I help them get there? What is our marketplace? What does it have in store for somebody, for a team? When we think about building out a team, and what I tell people is, as you're thinking about the what, take it in bite-sized pieces. Don't worry about the 5-year plan, because none of us have a crystal ball. Like that question of where do you see yourself in 5 years? Nobody can answer it. Like, especially in the world of startups, think about realistically, like the next 18 to 24 and map it out that way and put milestones in place to think about regrouping with this individual to make sure that you're on pace together. So that's the what. And then it becomes the hiring process. So the hiring process is this.
Sorry, just before we jump into the hiring process, you've got the what, and you've got it mapped out into quadrants. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to take notes, but I think I might've missed a quadrant. So I heard things we need, things we'd like to have, things we'll need in the next 18 to 24 months. And then I've got
and where you're going to compromise.
Okay.
So like what must have, like to have, compromise, because you're going to compromise on one of those top two. What is that? And remember each statement and why. And then the fourth piece is, what does the road ahead look like? Sorry, it's all in my mind, Collin. So I'm like, yeah, I can totally see it. You're like, no, you can't.
Totally. I'm like, so far we're at a pyramid.
That's not a quadrant. What are you talking about? I love it.
Yeah. Agree to disagree on our shapes here, but let's talk about the process.
Well, I was never good at geometry. So there's that. No, I'm kidding. Although I really wasn't that great at it. So then it dovetails into the execution phase, which is the hiring process. So I'll give you a little analogy. If money wasn't an object, would you prefer to stay at a Motel 6 or a Four Seasons?
I mean, it depends on the location, but probably the Four Seasons.
And think about the concierge at the Four Seasons, right? They make you feel special. So when it comes to the hiring process, you want to be like the Four Seasons. You don't want to be like the Motel 6, where you roll up, the key might be like still on like some old school keychain that you have to manually undo, versus when you walk in, they know your name, they're expecting you, they're waiting for you, you feel special. So think about your hiring process like that, in terms of, regardless of the outcome, you still want to make people feel like it was worth their time to get to know you, because here's the deal. People talk, we're living out loud. And just because somebody's a no today doesn't mean that they're a no forever. What happens in 2 years from now when you intersect again and they're perfect for the job? Why would you turn them off? Or what if they're a referral source for you? Like, the number one source of hire should always be referrals. Why piss people off? Or they could be a customer, or they could hire you one day. So don't be a jackhole. Be nice. So there's that. So all of that. But when you map it out, you want to think about who is responsible for what is the intention, make sure that scorecard is on point, that anybody that's going to be interviewing is utilizing it, that you are able to come together before and after each step as a team to debrief properly together and to set expectations for what happens next, and that you're having productive conversations with the candidate throughout the entire journey of the interview process. Meaning, here's what to expect. I've really enjoyed our phone screen. Here's what's going to happen next. I'm going to regroup with the team. What I'd like to have happen, because I've really enjoyed our conversation, is the next phase is a panel and a video with these three people. It's going to be someone from customer success, someone from product, and someone from marketing. Those three people, depending on schedules, I will follow through with you to let you know what that is and what our goals are so that you can prepare properly. How awesome is that versus like, I don't know, I'm just showing up for a video and I have no idea who these people are, and I've had no real opportunity to prepare. They're going to ask me questions that I don't even know where they're coming from. And now they're judging me because they're not prepared and I look like an idiot and they're saying I'm not good for the job when this is your ideal person for the job. So it goes into that whole adage of what you put into something is what you get back from it. So have a documented process. There are all sorts of things that you can do. You can use Trello, you can use Basecamp, you can use Airtable, you can use Google Sheets, you can use your applicant tracking system, you can use your CRM. Like there's a million different ways to do this. So how you want to do it is up to you. Choose your own adventure that's going to be great for you. But have a documented process. Have time taken where anybody that's interviewed can come back together to digest within 24 hours because you don't want to leave somebody hanging. Mm-hmm. And know what that process looks like from soup to nuts and don't deviate from it. Meaning, if for some reason something happens with scheduling, over communicate proactively. Don't leave the person there wondering what's going on, because the longer you do that or you ghost them, they start building up a case against you. You don't want that to be the case. You could say, oh, we had a 911 with a client and I need to swap out our time. I'm so sorry, this is a priority and I will make time for you. But this is important. I don't want to lose our momentum. Instead of me, I'd like for you to speak with our CMO and our head of customer success. And then I'll come back in so we don't lose a step. We just, instead of this being the next step, we're front loading it. And people are like, oh, okay, you thought about this? Like, thank you so much. So that's what the process looks like, is you go through those motions, you talk about things early and often. You don't wait till the 11th hour to play weird negotiating games. I did a LinkedIn Live earlier today where they're talking about negotiation and what levers do you pull. I'm like, you don't play games and you don't pull levers. You have a cards face up on the table conversation to confirm or deny where you're coming from, what's important to you and what it takes to get you. And if a company can't do that, or they wait till the 11th hour to play a game, good tell for you to understand that you probably don't want to work there, right? Mm-hmm. So these are the things, is it's rooted in process, it's rooted in communication, and it's rooted in thinking about yourself like the Four Seasons concierge.
I love it. And as you're describing this, I'm thinking you're taking a very sales-minded approach to this. You're treating this person like a hot prospect that you really want to close, not as somebody who's looking for a job, that you're doing a favor by giving them this job. It's sort of, you flip I don't know if it's intentional or if it just sort of happened because of your background, but it really seems like the opposite of a lot of attitudes that I've seen out there in the hiring world.
I think it's probably because it's all of the above, right? So I never thought I was going to be a recruiter. And when I think about that term, I still cringe. And that's why I started my company, is to help companies get it right. Not because I wanted to be a sales recruiter when I grew up. It's because there's a problem and I want to fix it. And one of the best ways that I can fix it, and let's go back to your fun little term about me being a unicorn. You don't sell $100 million in revenue if you suck at discovery and communication and thinking about your buyer and where they are and what they might need outside of my own personal agenda, right? And so that's where all this comes from, is the power of discovery. That's never worked against me. Why would I take any different of an approach to my sales recruiting process? It's also something that kind of pays it forward to my clients, because they don't think about this. They're like, oh my gosh, wait, this does feel like our sales process. Sales and recruiting, they're not dissimilar. Why are we treating it like it's something different? Just because a prospect, like let's say it's a prospect that comes in with an ideal a target, and they say no, or you say no, like your product's not ready for them yet. Do you just ghost them and say, I mean, some people do, which is like, that's a whole other, I can't even, but let's say that it's you and I. We would never in a million years do that. Why is it okay for us to think that that's right in the recruiting process when it has to do with your own team and your own business to scale it? Mm-hmm. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me.
100%. It's, yeah. Without pulling up specific examples or roasting anybody, because I don't think that's productive. No. I totally agree about treating all candidates with respect and being clear in the communication around timelines. And here's Like one of the things that I loved most about Who Is It it actually, as somebody who'd spent time in sales, is I finally saw our recruiting process like the sales funnel that it really truly is. And I don't know why it took me that long to set the light off. But as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, like we wouldn't do that to a prospect. Why would you do that to another human? And arguably finding a job is much more important than buying something. It's a big step in their life. And so people are that much more sensitive to being treated or mistreated. And it's your reputation in the industry, in the city, in the, state that you're in. Like, why would you want to risk that by just not having something that's common courtesy?
I think it's a mindset thing, Collin. And it goes back, like, do you remember when we first started talking today and I was talking about that necessary evil mindset? There are certain leaders that are like, sales and recruiting, that's a pain in my ass. Like, I don't want to deal with this. Like, just get people in, like, just get the funnel going. Like, it should be so easy. Our product should just sell itself, right? Like, it should just be great.
Mm-hmm.
When you have that mindset, what do you think the other person, whether it's a buyer, whether it's a candidate, whether it's your own employee base, I don't care who it is, what do you think that really tells them? Like, it means that I don't care. Like, you're just here to serve me, right? Like, I have other priorities. When that's your mindset, like in my mind, and I wholeheartedly believe in this, mindset shapes everything else, and everything is connected. And so if that's what I'm putting out foundationally, it all sort of goes from there. And that in my mind is just such a shame. And I applaud you for being like, I don't know what took me so long, but you got there, which is great. Here's the other thing. It's the golden rule. If the roles were reversed and you were on the other side of the table as a buyer or as a potential candidate, how would you want to be treated? How would you want to receive feedback? When would you like to get that? It's like all of those things. And I think we just don't think about that because we go under the veil of I'm so busy, or this is startup life. Like, you just have to figure it out. Like, no, stop. That's terrible. It doesn't have to be that way. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Cool. I can't agree more. I can't claim to have been perfect at this all the time. I've certainly made a lot of these mistakes. I've certainly gone through the hiring process or the early stages of the hiring process with people, and I've just been so overwhelmed that I didn't get back to people. Now, hopefully we're better at that, and we've got systems and people and teams in place, but it's a growing journey, and I love that you're sort of no excuses. This is the right way to treat people. I feel like we could keep going on hiring and sales forever. And so, the podcast has to be a certain length and it can't be 6 hours, although I'm sure we could have that conversation. We'd both be exhausted. But my last question is sort of, everybody thinks about hiring from how do I make that hire? But the last sort of piece, and almost you could argue one of the most important pieces, is what happens after the hire. So last question, and then we'll wrap it up.
It is just important to hire right as it is to onboard and enable, right? So, like, why do we work so hard to hire someone to just leave them to their own devices and die on the vine? That's just beyond me. So in my mind, training and onboarding and enablement are very different things. So onboarding is what happens right when you start. And again, let's go back to the Four Seasons analogy. There's such a big opportunity for risk between when somebody accepts your role and they start through that resignation process, through counteroffers, through other opportunities that come their way that they just can't help themselves. They've got to listen to. Your work isn't done the second that the hire is made. So the faster you can not just get the paperwork wrapped up, but really outline what to expect, an agenda, who's involved, get other people in the team involved. Hey, I was in your role a year ago, and I'm here to talk to you about anything that you might want to talk about what to expect, what my first few weeks were like, how I can help you get up to speed faster. I'm here for you. Like, those little things go a long way. And then it comes to onboarding. And again, it's a process. It's a checklist. Who's doing what, where? Like, how many times have you heard of people, or I've been there myself. It's day one. You're trying to like, be the early bird that gets the worm. You get there, like the door's locked. You can't even get into the office. You're standing around. Nobody's answering their phone. You then get pushed off into security. Nobody was really expecting you. They're not prepared for you. You get somebody's old laptop that still has all their old stuff loaded onto it, or the laptop's on order and it takes like 12 weeks. And you're just sitting there versus the person that walks through and there's somebody waiting there. You grabbed Starbucks beforehand together. You got breakfast. Your whole workstation is set up. There's swag there. Your name's on there. It's all personalized to you. You have an agenda of what to expect that first day, that first week, that first month, that first quarter. And then that sets the foundation for communication of ongoing training, ongoing enablement, what we uncovered together through the interview process in terms of if there were assessments or if there were things that we talked about, how can I help you get better? Because remember that fourth quadrant of what does the road ahead look like? The reason why that's in the quadrant and that you're writing that down is so that you make note of it. So flash forward, now you've got the hire, there are no hidden surprises and you've covered that. And they're like, oh my gosh, you listened to me through the interview and you're actually like still listening to me and you're applying it. This is crazy. That's how you instill people that want to be in it with you for the long haul because you're taking it seriously. And again, what you put in is what you get back. So I'm going to leave on that note.
Perfect. I think 100% agree. The experience between being locked out of your first day and having somebody meet you at the front door with laptop and everything ready, or even like you said, meeting them for breakfast before they come and are, waiting for somebody to let them in. It's Motel 6 versus Four Seasons, and what kind of company, like you need to make the decision and understand that if you don't make the decision, you're making the decision to be the Motel 6, right? And so what kind of company do you want to be, Motel 6 or Four Seasons?
Bed bugs or pillow top? I don't know.
There you go. Amy, thank you so much for coming on the show. I learned a ton. I got a bunch of notes here myself. I think this was super valuable. If anybody's wanting to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
So there's two ways. I like to live out loud myself on the good old interweb. So LinkedIn, I am there often, and I celebrate the power of conversation. Every which way to get in touch with me is there, or avenuetalentpartners.com.
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming on the show, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you for having me. I hope this was helpful. Really appreciate it.
Definitely.